Court has ruled in a 6-3 decision that a president has absolute immunity against prosecution for official acts.
I will proudly be supporting the president in Chicago. I will work through November to make sure he gets reelected.
I tell everybody that's one debate. You know, that does not define who President Biden is. You know, we all have off days.
Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. What a time in America, and welcome to America Decides. President Biden now heading back to the White House tonight after a weekend at Camp David, where he worked to reassure some Democrats by phone after last week's debate. A new CBS News poll shows voters do have some concerns, but we start tonight with the big news, a landmark ruling from the United States Supreme Court divided 6-3 along ideological lines. The justices say a president now has, quote, absolute immunity from prosecution when it comes to so-called official acts. The interpretation, of course, of what constitutes an official act is likely to be further determined by the courts. Former President Trump has long argued in favor of presidential power.
If a president doesn't have full immunity, you really don't have a president.
We start our coverage tonight with a powerhouse group, CBS News' chief legal correspondent, Jan Crawford, and CBS News' correspondent on Capitol Hill, and one of the great legal minds at CBS News, Scott MacFarlane. Great to have both of you here. Let's really just, this is, what a moment. You have the Supreme Court weighing in on presidential power. And let's pull up the ruling. We have 6 justices ruling in favor, the majority opinion. You have 3 in dissent. Jan, the dissent, though, struck me as really something that was outside of the norm we see from the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I mean, it was written by Justice Sonia Sotomayor on behalf of the 3 liberals. Obviously, as you said, a deeply divided court along ideological lines, and it was unusually sharp and fierce. I mean, with fear for our democracy, I dissent. I've never seen a justice do anything like that in a Supreme Court opinion, a dissent. And, you know, she got the other 2 liberals to join. I thought it was also interesting that the Chief Justice, who wrote the majority opinion, had some unusually sharp responses to her dissent, accusing the dissents of fear-mongering, you know, of these extreme hypotheticals and not really based on any kind of actual reasoning. So this kind of back and forth between the justices on this issue, I think, really shows the stark divide on this court right now.
Help us understand how significant that is, to have not only the charged language we saw in the dissent raising concerns about American democracy, but also to have the Chief Justice, who you've covered so deeply, written about extensively, to have him push back against them, to throw cold water on their arguments. What kind of a moment is this for the court in terms of how it sees itself, how they talk amongst each other, and its own integrity with the public?
You know, this is a deeply divided court. We've seen that throughout this term on a number of issues. In fact, going back to the Dobbs decision 2 years ago that overturned Roe versus Wade, that you have these 6 conservatives who are willing to take kind of bold new areas of the law. And this is an issue that John Roberts, who worked in the executive branch along with 4 other justices over the years before they became justices, does care deeply about, the issue of executive power. And he believes, and I'm not surprised at all that he wrote this decision, he's written all of the kind of executive power decisions. He believes in a very robust form of executive power. And this decision today, as the court noted, goes well beyond Trump. Unlike the political branches, the court said today, they're not just concerned with the issue right in front of them, the existing situation, the peculiar moment in time that we're in. They have to think about the future presidents. And there was a real concern on this court that without some kind of restraint, without some kind of immunity, that future presidents could face routine prosecutions when someone disagreed with their policies, whether it's immigration or whatever. And in fact, Trump teed that up at the debate when he raised the prospect that, you know, President Biden, if he's out of office, could be prosecuted for his immigration policy. So you have this back and forth, though, I mean, where you have, you know, Justice Sotomayor saying that now, you know, the president is basically a king above the law. Very, very bitter disputes among these justices. It's the last day of the term, so they're all going to get out of town, and they'll be back the first, you know, last week of September. We'll see if that tends to cool off some of the tempers we see on display.
The last day of the term, by no means the last word. Let's pull up former President Trump's response on social media. He said, quote, in all caps, big win for our Constitution and democracy. proud to be an American. So he's celebrating today, Scott. You have covered, though, the January 6th possible trial about the former president's conduct, along with many other January 6 cases. So the president's in a good mood based on that Truth Social posting. But let's bring up a photo of Judge Tanya Chutkan, the U.S. District Court judge in Washington, D.C. She is overseeing the January 6 case, appointed by President Obama, a former trial attorney and supervisor. Scott, what is her role now in determining whether Trump will face a trial on January 6th or not before November 6th?
The case is now back in her hands, but how much of the case remains to be seen. This case has been with her since August 2023. She was randomly assigned this case and moved swiftly through the opening weeks of it and set a trial date for March 4th, you remember. Then when the appeals moved their way to the appeals court and ultimately to the Supreme Court, everything froze in place on February 6th. It's now unfrozen, but instead of being stuck in the mud, it's like stuck in this quicksand, which is going to suck down all the bandwidth of this court. They may have to litigate all kinds of issues to keep this prosecution alive, if it can stay alive. All of that eliminates the prospect of having a trial before November 5th. A pre-election trial was already a long shot.
There's no shot?
I don't see any path forward with any challenge from the former president to the case itself and the indictment. The indictment may have to be slimmed down, maybe not. If so, if it's not going to be slimmed down, it's going to have to be litigated. Does this fall as an official act or an unofficial act? It's going to require hearings. It's going to give Donald Trump.
How quickly could Special Counsel Jack Smith act to try to make it happen?
It could be a matter of days until he does something to push forward the case. He may be trying to figure out exactly what to do based on the trajectory of that ruling from the Supreme Court. But it was already a long shot to get this thing to trial because Judge Chutkan, Bob, had already told the parties you get 2 or 3 months to get ready for trial, notwithstanding anything coming out of the appeals court or the Supreme Court. You need time to get ready for trial, and this case is frozen. So if it came back to her unblemished today, she would still give the parties till September or October, and it's difficult to get a trial in by November 5th. Now there's a complicating factor, if not an infinite number of complicating factors. This thing is going to fall into a multi-month, if not multi-year path.
And really quickly, Jan, did the majority opinion today and any of the justices question the credibility of the special counsel?
Yeah, Justice Thomas, I think, wrote a real clear roadmap in a concurring opinion that I think we're going to see used in the documents case in Florida. That was not an issue directly raised in the Supreme Court in this case. That was directly raised in that classified documents case. And Judge Cannon is now considering that. And Justice Thomas has written what I believe is an opinion that she may well embrace, or at least see it as a roadmap, which would mean that the special counsel was appointed potentially was unconstitutional.
A lot of serious issues at play here, and unpredictable moment politically and legally. Jan Crawford and Scott McFarland, thank you very much for your reporting. We appreciate it.
I do think that President Biden has earned the respect of Democrats, and Joe Biden is going to be our leader going forward.
After last week's debate, new CBS News polling shows more Americans are now questioning President Biden and his ability to serve. We'll look at those numbers coming up next. A new CBS News poll finds a growing number of American voters don't think President Biden should be running after that debate in Atlanta with former President Trump. 72% of registered voters in our CBS News poll say the president does not have, in their view, the mental and cognitive health to serve. That's up by 7 points compared to the time before the debate. Joining us now is Anthony Salvanto and Weijia Jiang. Weijia's at the White House. Anthony here at the table. He is CBS News' Executive Director of Elections and Surveys. Weijia, our senior White House correspondent. Weijia, let's begin with you for a moment, though. I want to play something from one of the president's key allies, Congressman James Clyburn of South Carolina.
The people who looked at those answers from both came to the conclusion that on substance, Joe Biden was the winner far and away. But people looking at television, not paying much attention to anything else but how they look, will go with style. And Joe Biden has never been a show horse. He's always been a workhorse. Just the opposite is true with his opponent, Nothing but show, no substance.
Ouija, such a really important political moment for President Biden. I think back to 2020 when Congressman Clyburn said, I know Joe, Joe knows us. He helped make the Biden presidency happen. Inside the White House today, when you're talking to people familiar with the president and his top advisors, are they looking to Congressman Clyburn's comments and feeling heartened that the key leaders in the Democratic Party are still behind them in a forceful way? Or are they skittish and nervous about the latest polling numbers?
They are trying to brush off the latest numbers, Robert. And sure, they keep pointing to the fact that those who really know Biden know that what the American public saw on Thursday, they argue, is not the Biden that serves here at the White House every day. They're trying to make the case that this was simply a bad night. And in that interview with Clyburn, he actually goes on to say that he is aware of what information overload is like. And in this case, he believes it was preparation overload. And I have talked to some staffers inside of the White House who also echoed that, saying that they think the reason Biden performed the way he did was because there was too much emphasis on pumping him up with facts and figures rather than letting him be Joe Biden and come out and talk about his anecdotes, talk about his, decades of experience as a lawmaker. And so they are trying to turn the page, Robert, and say that this was just a one-off for President Biden. There's nothing to see here. But of course, the problem is that the American public saw what they saw, and they want answers about why it was such a bad night. And that is something that the White House and the campaign has not been able to answer. They initially said that he had a raspy voice because he had a cold. But what about the freezing? What about the not being able to articulate his thoughts? What about not being able to fact check Donald Trump in real time, as he had prepared to do? And so there are still many outstanding questions here, Robert. But the bottom line, I would say, is that sources want people to take away that he is not going anywhere. He has no plans to drop out of the race, no plans to change his campaign cadence. And he is here serving as president. In fact, he's on his way back from Camp David to the White House.
We just stick with us. Anthony, we just heard your polling. Everyone was talking about it over the weekend. CBS News shows there is concern about President Biden. But as a political analyst and as a pollster, help us understand what is the real impact on the race, if any. If voters have concerns about age based on your work, does that override other concerns they might have, like about former President Trump's conduct or about the economy or immigration? Does this issue kind of hover over the whole Biden campaign and whether voters will back him or not? Or is it more just of a side issue that's tangential to the real drivers of this race?
Well, it's been hovering. So the numbers you read at the top, that drop after the debate, the fact is we've been measuring which candidate does either candidate have the mental and cognitive health to serve for months. And it was always relatively low for President Biden. It was in the 30s, mid-low 30s. And then it goes down after the debate. And what I think that tells you is, for a lot of the public, it was kind of confirming a suspicion that they held. And in that regard, it seems like something that would be more durable and lasting in that regard, or maybe at least harder to turn around. The second part, Bob, to your question, is it is related to whether or not they think he ought to be running, and particularly for Democrats. When they say, and it's almost half the party that now says that he ought not be the nominee, it's related to their view that he doesn't have the mental and cognitive health to serve. And there's a strategic component to that. It's because they don't think he can campaign effectively.
With all that said, quickly, Anthony, if you were talking to a Democrat and they said, Anthony Salvanto, I need a credible, nonpartisan polling assessment. Is President Biden still competitive in this race, despite everything that happened at the debate?
Give it a couple of days. And the reason I say that as a pollster is that people watch the debate. Now they've gone and they've talked to their friends and they've seen the coverage and they've seen the Biden surrogates out there making their case. Let them take in all of that information, which is how people process big, important things like this, and then start to see polling maybe this week, maybe into next week or after the holiday, after they go home and talk about it at the barbecues. That's when you start to see something that might be more durable as a change or not a change in the race.
And Weija, real quick, what do we expect from the president in the coming days?
Robert, I'm sorry to be checking my phone, but I'm just getting some new information from campaign advisors who are pointing to a new internal poll from the Biden camp. And they say, according to these numbers, and they looked at 7 key battleground states, they are claiming that the president's numbers going head-to-head with Donald Trump have been unchanged as a result of the debate. They are claiming that age was already baked in, and people already knew that the president was old as they were going into the debate. And so they think that after they watched him, they came away with the idea that, yes, he is old and he struggles sometimes, as any grandparent would, to gather their thoughts. But they claim that they are not worried about the CBS News poll and others, and in fact claim that, you know, in the coming weeks, other public polls will match what they are seeing internally. As for the president, he has a very robust schedule coming up. He is hosting the NATO summit here in Washington, D.C. in just about a week. And of course, you know, the White House says every day to us that he has to serve as president. And so we expect to see him in the coming days. Of course, we don't know exactly what more they might add with regard to his schedule, because, again, they really want to push back, Robert, and make the point that he is here.
Great fresh reporting from Weija Jiang at the White House. We always appreciate it. Wow, it shows the Biden people, they're digging in, pushing back against the critics, and respectfully pushing back against the pollsters, clearly. I know you have to deal with that from time to time, Anthony.
It's an election year.
It is.
That's what happens.
Anthony has to have thick skin. Anthony Salvanto and Weija Jiang, thanks again. And a quick programming note, join Anthony for a special Independence Day edition of America Decides. Anthony and our CBS Reports documentary team went out into the field to talk to voters behind the polls. His half-hour documentary is followed by an America Decides panel about the election in November. That airs this Thursday, July 4th at 5 p.m. Eastern. Post-debate decisions. What are other elected Democrats saying about the top of the ticket? We'll discuss coming up. You're streaming America Decides. President Biden's family is urging him to stay in the presidential race after that weekend at Camp David. And so as top Democrats do close ranks around President Biden after that debate performance last week, Ashley Etienne joins us now from our D.C. studio to further discuss. Ashley, you have so much experience on Capitol Hill, of course, in the Biden White House, working closely with Vice President Harris. Let's begin with her.
Sure.
Vice President Harris, in the immediate aftermath of this debate, goes on television, defends President Biden. What is her role now at this fragile political crossroads and moment for the Biden administration, politically and inside, even as a confidant of the president?
I mean, that's the question I have really for the White House and for the campaign is what is the strategy to utilize her? They have to better position her because, you know.
don't think she's being well positioned?
No, I said better. So I think she is. Over the last couple of years, you've seen where she now is polling higher among key constituencies, higher than Joe Biden in some respects. So she's always added value, and now you're starting to see that in the poll. But the question is, after Thursday, now the pressure is mounting on her. We've already seen now where editorial boards from the Wall Street Journal to others are starting to question whether or not she's capable, competent, and ready for the job. So I think they need to actually start to position her as an even bigger asset for him, start to use her more on the national stage, give her more speeches, bigger speeches, create a bigger platform for her. And I think that'll, to some degree, settle the concerns that Democrats are having.
Where do you think she has been effective? We always hear about her work on abortion rights.
Yeah.
Put that aside for a second, because she's gotten a lot of credit for galvanizing Democrats on this issue. As someone who has worked closely with her, where do you believe she's been effective in the last few years, and where could that spotlight maybe be? Because you're right, there are some concerns among some voters about her. So where do you think she hasn't done enough maybe to play up what she's done?
Well, I mean, I want to give Anthony some credit here at CBS. I mean, there was a CBS polling that showed that she does incredibly well with young people, people of color, with women. That was maybe a year and a half ago. Took that poll into the White House. look at these numbers, now they started to over-index with those constituencies. And now she's outpolling the president with those particular groups. And as you know, those are going to be key constituencies winning in these battleground states. So she's already creating value. The other thing that I think she's doing very well is she's doing more non-traditional media outlets. She's sitting down with influencers that have big platforms. So they're becoming more innovative with how they actually attract key constituencies and meet voters actually where they are. And so that is where I think she's having an outsized impact on this race.
When I look ahead at the calendar, I see the vice presidential debate, which is possible, likely to happen at some point whenever former President Trump picks a running mate, and also a convention speaks. How do you believe, based on your conversations with people close to her, your knowledge of her, how she's going to handle those two things?
Well, I mean, I think they know those are big moments and very important ones for her, as well as they're very important ones for the president. I think she's going to continue to draw on the issues that she's strongest, which is the reproductive rights fight. Democracy is a strong suit for her. Climate, she's, has a track record even dating back to her time in the Senate as a leader on those issues. So I think she's going to lean into her strong suits. She's going to play to her strengths, which is she's got the ability to appeal to those key audiences in a way that President Biden does not. So the idea is, how do we lean into that? But then also, how do we really present her speech, her accomplishments, her value in a way that's creative and not stale and trite? So in other words, how do we go beyond just a speech at the podium? Do you create some content around that? Do you create events around that where she can actually show more dimension than just a speech? And I think that's her challenge right now. She's got to prove that she's ready for the job just in case anything were to happen, but also make herself very relatable so that people actually are drawn to her and want even more of her.
And finally, you have been a top aide to Vice President Harris. You've also been a top aide to Speaker Nancy Pelosi. When you talk to your friends on Capitol Hill, House Democrats, those who work with House Democrats, do you sense real talk, so an uproar that they want to nudge President Biden out, or are they just kind of unhappy with the debate and they're ready to back him at the convention?
So we're doing real talk?
We always do real talk.
I love how you...
We always do. But I know you're a very plugged-in Democrat.
Yes.
I'm just really trying to take your temperature.
Sure.
What is the actual
mood?
Yeah, the mood and the actual reality of how House Democrats feel about the aftermath.
Okay, here's the reality in the mood. The mood is folks were definitely very freaked out on Thursday night.
They were.
Folks woke up.
So that wasn't overplayed in your view?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
No, I mean, you saw the debate. I don't think that, people were rightfully freaked out about it. But not just Democrats. I will say a lot of Nikki Haley voters were in my phone as well, because they have, they're vested in Joe Biden's success because they don't want Trump, obviously. But the other thing is they woke up then Friday morning, saw the North Carolina speech, and folks got enthusiastic again. Folks got pumped up, fired up all over again. And I think it really made this point that he just had a bad night. Not that he's bad, but that he had a bad night. And so that's the mood. The other thing that I think is most helpful, and is something that you talked about at the top of the show, which is the leadership of the party rallying around the president. That has really helped sort of tamp down any public comments about being dissatisfied with how the president performed. But I think Democrats are feeling encouraged by it. But can I just add one thing? I think Thursday night really forced our hand in a way that hasn't been forced before. It forced us to do what we, I think, have been knowing as a party we've needed to do, and that is to stop being so polite to the president, to the campaign, and start to activate the bench around Joe Biden. And start to utilize our assets more effectively. You know this, you followed a lot of presidential campaigns. It's typically not until 3 weeks out that we start to activate these big surrogates. But now it's going to happen sooner than it ever has before. The Gavin Newsoms, the Whitmer, get all of them out in the field and start to create more energy.
You know all the players. You know what's happening. We appreciate it, Ashley.
Of course,
Thanks so much for joining. Ashley Etienne, always on top of it. The Supreme Court's huge decision on presidential immunity. Coming up next, we'll take a closer look again at that decision and the dissent, what it could mean for the pending Trump legal cases. You're streaming America Decides. The three dissenting Supreme Court justices did issue a blistering dissent today. It was penned by Justice Sonia Sotomayor. Let's discuss all of that with former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Tom Dupree. Tom, always great to see you. What do you make of the dissent? Earlier, Jan Crawford told us it was significant. What about legally? What does it all mean for presidential powers going ahead?
Right. I think the dissent is significant. Look, Justice Sotomayor, I thought, wrote very powerfully and very passionately about the dangers that she thought the majority's opinion would unleash. She made the point, which is true, which is a hallowed principle in American law that no one is above the law. And at least in her view, the majority's decision basically overturned that presumption. In some respects, it actually reminded me of Justice Breyer's dissent back in Bush versus Gore, where he expressed great personal concern that the majority's decision would undermine people's faith in judges as neutral arbiters of the rule of law. Hopefully, Justice Sotomayor's dire predictions of the consequences of today's ruling won't come to pass, but there's no question that she felt very, very strongly that the majority had made a significant turn in the wrong direction.
Earlier in the show, we talked with Scott MacFarlane about what this all means for the January 6th case and whether it will take place this year, whether Judge Tanya Chutkan will try to speed things up, even though she has to now deal with a lot of these presidential power questions. What's your assessment about how Jack Smith, the special counsel, is going to handle this and move ahead?
I think there are going to be two consequences, both on Jack Smith's plate. The first is he is going to have to narrow his complaint. There's no question that at least some of the conduct that he charged Trump with has now been declared to be immune from prosecution by the Supreme Court. So he is going to have to dust off his complaint, march through his allegations one by one, and make a determination as to which ones he thinks survive and which ones don't. The second way it's going to affect what he does is, to your point, timing. No question in my mind that the homework assignment that the Supreme Court gave Judge Chutkan to figure out how to apply their decision to the facts of this case is going to take her months, not weeks, months to resolve. There may be other appeals arising from it. So I think the practical consequence of today's decision is it makes the possibility of a trial before the November election zero.
As a lawyer, what's the definition of an official act based on your reading of this ruling? If former President Trump, to steal one of his phrases, goes out on Fifth Avenue and shoots someone if he's president of the United States, but says before he pulls the trigger, this is an official act, would that pass muster in court? What defines an official act versus something that could be open to prosecution down the line based on what you've read here today?
Well, that's an excellent question. And there may be comes a point in time where that particular question is going to be litigated, how you figure out what's an official act and what isn't. I think in this case, and probably in any future case, it's not going to be the president's mere say-so. So to your hypothetical, if someone says this is an official act and shoots someone, I don't think that the mere saying this is an official act would do it. I think what they would look at is whether the president was making at least a colorable or a plausible argument that whatever action he took was authorized by our statutes, by our Constitution. It wasn't just some sort of manufactured pretense, but it was a legitimate exercise of his presidential power under our Constitution.
Tom, we're going to be having to talk to lawyers like you for a long time as this all unfolds. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.
For more on this and the political fallout, I'm joined now by Shelby Talcott and Braxton Brooker. Shelby is a politics reporter for Semaphore. Braxton is Politico's national political correspondent. Great to see all of you, both of you here. Let's begin. I want to play some Democrats talking about the debate fallout. Let's listen.
Well, I think both candidates struggled. I don't think either candidate had a very good night on the debate night. But I also do know that it does matter when we're looking at presidential performance and not necessarily debate performance.
It certainly was a setback. But, of course, I believe a setback is nothing more than a setup for a comeback.
I might even say that I had a more difficult evening than the president did, and here I am right now having this conversation. And I'd really like to remind to everybody watching that right now Biden is 1 and Trump is still 0, and he's the only person that's ever beaten Trump. And I really believe that Joe Biden will do that again.
So you've heard a chorus there of Democrats shrugging off the performance, focusing on former President Trump. But let's play something from today. Kentucky Governor, Democrat Andy Beshear.
Well, the debate performance was rough. It was a very bad night for the president. But he is still the candidate. Only he can make decisions about his future candidacy. And so as long as he continues to be in the race, I support him.
So what's the truth, based on your reporting, about the Democratic Party? Braxton, let's begin with you.
I think the truth is what you're hearing right now, but you got to look in between the lines, right? Yes, they are supportive of President Biden so long as he's staying on the ticket. If there's any wavering of the president, if he shows some signal that he's willing to step down, then it's, oh, baby, it's all hands on deck. Let's go after this, which is what I think you heard Governor Beshear talk about. So as long as Biden is still the nominee, there's going to be support around him. You don't really hear many Democrats outside of someone say like a James Carville, who is out there saying like, we have to move on. We cannot put this man out on the ticket. But if it comes to, right before the conventions and the president saying like, hey, I can't do this anymore, prepare for kind of a knockdown, drag-out fight for who's going to emerge as the top of the ticket there.
What are you hearing?
Yeah, I completely agree with that assessment. And it feels like when I talk to Democrats, they're sort of waiting for permission to be able to say, okay, yes, sure, step aside. And that permission can only come from the president. And so far, the president has made it pretty clear that people close to him want him to stay in the race. And so unless there is a shift, this is all sort of, panic mode that we're hearing quietly from some Democrats, but from a lot of donors as well. But I'm skeptical that it goes beyond that unless the president himself decides to have a change of heart and step down.
And I'll say, like, if more polls come out like what the CBS poll has, showing that people are really wanting to change nominees, I think Democrats may have to reconsider. But until more polls come out, I think right now, as we're speaking, Biden is safe.
Yet, so many Biden sources and Democrats today are looking at the Trump Supreme Court ruling on immunity and saying this is someone who faces sentencing in New York on July 11th and now has almost unlimited presidential power should he win the White House again, and believe that will be a galvanizing issue for Democrats, despite what happened at the debate. What are you hearing, Shelby, from the Trump campaign about how they see this Supreme Court ruling? We've seen the social media celebration, but it's not like he has no more legal challenges. It's still a rocky road.
Absolutely. Well, the Trump campaign is really trying to focus on the presidential election. And their feeling is if they win the presidential election, some of these, right, might go away. Some of these might get pushed back even further. But what they've been trying to do throughout this entire election is push all of these cases back as long as possible. And what this ruling does is effectively solidify that these cases are going to be pushed back a lot. So they are viewing that even privately as a pretty big win today. And from both of you, I'll begin with you, Braxton, is the VP search continues for Trump. We just talked with Ashley Etienne, one of the former top aides to Vice President Harris. What are you hearing about Republicans and how they see the Trump pick?
Well, look, there was talk right before the debate that Trump was going to reveal his pick early, but because he said such a good debate, given the circumstances, I think they're going to try to slow walk this and maybe wait till the convention later on this month. But look, I mean, if you're playing the parlor game, it does seem like Doug Burgum has the leading edge right now. But Trump is unpredictable, and who knows what he actually wants. But certainly there seem to be a lot of people kind of backing the Burgum pick.
Shelby, quickly, you're reporting?
Yeah, I'm hearing the same thing between Doug Burgum and J.D. Vance. I think there's benefits to both, and different people are pushing those candidates. Don Jr. is a really big fan of J.D. Vance, so he's certainly been talking to his father about that. But a lot of people are Doug Burgum fans, and ultimately, as I'm sure you have heard a million times, the decision is going to come down to Donald Trump and Donald Trump alone.
And it's such a generational difference. You have Senator Vance being 39 years old, Doug Burgum in his mid-60s. Shelby Talcott and Braxton Brookler, thank you so much for coming by. We appreciate it. Always appreciate your reporting. And that post-debate campaign turmoil among Democrats, which you've been hearing about all day, some are now pointing to President Lyndon Johnson's decision in March 31st, 1968, to bow out as a possible issue that could hover over this campaign. We'll see. You're streaming America Decides.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
History. Welcome back to America Decides, when then President Lyndon Johnson announced he would not run again in March 1968. It did rock American politics. His list of legislative achievements at the time was long, but Johnson had faced a backlash over his handling of Vietnam. So what does this all mean for the presidential election as we look both back and forward? Well, to help us understand all of that, presidential historian, the great Douglas Brinkley joins us now. Doug, great to have you here. Thanks for being with us. When you think about Johnson's decision in 1968, it was such a turbulent time in America with the military, in American politics, with race relations. Do you see echoes of 1968 in Johnson's decision now, or is that a stretch, historically speaking?
Well, it's not a complete stretch. And obviously, the fact that we have the Democratic Convention in Chicago this August, the same thing happened in 1968. So there are going to be these comparisons made. Keep in mind, Lyndon Johnson started 68 with the Tet Offensive happening in Vietnam. He had been living and dining on "There's light at the end of the tunnel" in Vietnam. We're winning, which was General Westmoreland's line. Lo and behold, Tet belied that. And what Johnson did first off right was bring in real advisors. I don't mean family, I don't mean friends, I don't mean sycophants. He brought in all sorts of people like Dean Acheson. And at one point, Lyndon Johnson, before he dropped out on the footage you're showing, asked the great former Secretary of State Lyndon Johnson, why am I going down in the polls? What is it? Why are I'm not likable? What's going on here? And Acheson had the temerity to look at Johnson and said, because, Mr. President, you're not a very likable fellow. And the point being, I think Joe Biden has, if you surround yourself with yes people and family, you're not realizing and you say polls are all made up and the media's out to get you and, these are all lies around you, then you start becoming insular. Johnson, to his credit, read the tea leaves, recognized that he would be better off stepping down. Health was a consideration, too, for Johnson. And what we forget is that LBJ actually got a wave of approval after he stepped down, which got mired after Martin Luther King Jr. gets assassinated and RFK. And so it becomes chaotic 68. But most historians think Johnson did a heroic thing when he made the effort to look at the reality of the situation and step down.
When we look back to 1968, President Johnson seemed to have a bit of a hand in making sure that Hubert Humphrey emerged as the Democratic nominee. As Democrats look at the possibility of President Biden stepping away, though every person I know close to President Biden says he's all in, he's staying in. Do presidents have power ahead of a convention if they have the pledged delegates to try to influence the process or not?
They do, but if he stepped down, the only person he could give all of the delegates to is Kamala Harris. So I truly feel she is the person of the moment. If he stepped down, it would have to go to her. I know there are other scenarios where you put, 5 people in Chicago and all, but then it gets very tricky on the delegate count. So Biden's in the driver's seat, only he can decide, but he needs to expand his network of advisors. And I think in the end, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama may be the deciders. If they can team up, they are probably the only ones that can break through the Joe Biden and his White House team and maybe say to Biden, you got to step down. Let's turn it over to Kamala, and she'll become. He could even step down from the presidency, Biden, if he wanted, and Kamala could be president of the United States overnight, the first woman in U.S. history. I doubt any of this is happening. I think Biden will probably go forward to be the nominee, but this is the moment of decision. And we do think back to LBJ in 68 as an option Biden has to say, my time's up.
The big news, Doug, today, the immunity ruling by the Supreme Court. As someone who studies the presidency, writes about the presidency, thinks about the presidency, how do you see this Supreme Court ruling and what it means for presidential power in the wake of everything that happened with Richard Nixon 50 years ago and everything that now lies ahead?
Well, as you know, there's that incredible moment when Richard Nixon, as ex-president's on the David Frost, BBC interview, and Nixon said he believed that the president does it, it's legal. And Donald Trump has long been a Nixonian person, and he believes that anything he does, if he's president, he should be allowed to get away with it. And lo and behold, in his case of the United States versus Donald Trump or Donald Trump versus USA, Trump has won. And this is the gold star day for Trump because it is clear there will be, and nothing more done about this till after the election. And if Trump wins, this immunity, ability to have full immunity is something that we've never experienced in our country before. It allows Trump an extraordinary amount of executive power. And to be fair to our founders, or maybe not fair, they never really grappled with what is executive power. I mean, we really didn't have executive orders. I mean, we sometimes call Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation Executive Order number 1. It's not quite accurate. We don't have time to get into what, but by Theodore Roosevelt, and then by the 30s with FDR, you see this vast increase of an executive power to the point that FDR tried to add more Supreme Court justices, 6 extras, to rubber stamp the New Deal. Now we're seeing that it's no longer liberal left. It's a moment of conservative or right-wing revolution in our country, and the court is our work for the Federalist Society. This has been a long-range plan of increasing presidential power of the Federalist Society to deregulate America, if you like, since the Nixon years, because Nixon did EPA, affirmative action, and the like. We're now rolling back the tide to a pre-Nixon era with the Supreme Court.
And we are living in history, and we're glad to have a historian so highly esteemed to help us understand it all. Douglas Brinkley, thank you.
Thank
President
you.
narrowly won Wisconsin in 2020. We'll talk to voters there in that swing state to see if they're still sticking by President Biden this year. You're streaming America Decides. High-profile Democrats are sticking with President Biden in the wake of last week's debate. Maryland Governor Wes Moore says he does not foresee the president leaving the race. We're also hearing from Democratic voters about what they thought about that showdown. Shauna Mizell joins us now from Milwaukee. Shauna, thanks for being here. You spoke with Governor Moore about the debate. What did he say?
Bob, good evening. It's great to be with you. That's absolutely right. Governor Wes Moore in the state of Wisconsin over the weekend, immediately after the debate. He was actually supposed to be here for black voter outreach on behalf of the Biden campaign, but a lot of his visit this weekend was under the shadow of Biden's lackluster debate performance. Let's take a listen to what he told me about the president's performance over the weekend.
I think it actually is powerful, the fact that it has come off something that people have said, and even the president has acknowledged, all of us acknowledged, was not a great debate performance. Because I think the president has shown something that all of us knew about him, is that when you get knocked down, you get back up and you keep on fighting.
So Moore, like a lot of other Democrats, really expressing optimism and confidence despite Biden's performance at the debate on Thursday.
Shauna, you've also been speaking with voters in Wisconsin. Are they sticking with President Biden, those Democrats?
I spoke to a few voters over the weekend, and they really seem to repeat the same lines that we heard from Moore and other Democrats. They're chalking it up to a bad night. Let's take a listen.
Everybody going to have a down day as well as an up day, and I don't rest whether he was good or bad or shouldn't be on the ticket anymore or whatever. Because he had a bad day. We don't know what caused that day to be like it was, but we know he has the ability to serve the country.
That's one debate. That does not define who President Biden is. We all have off days, but that doesn't mean that that's the end of us. I still support him 100%.
So it's important to note that these are Democratic voters expressing their unwavering support for Biden. But in the state of Wisconsin, a crucial battleground state that's going to be needed to win the presidency, we're really going to be paying attention to independent voters and if their opinion has changed or swayed following that debate.
Shauna, you're talking to an influential governor. You're talking to the voters. Thank you very much. And that does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with our friend John Dickerson starts right now.